it's for me, it's always a very welcome opportunity to have the possibility of speaking in front of university students, and especially to have the possibility to engage in dialogue with all of you. So if it's okay with you, what I will do is make a presentation about some of the main elements of the situation in Mexico today and some of the topic that we're interested in, and then open it up for discussion. I will be most appreciative of your comments, your questions, or whatever you may want to say. Let me just start off by saying that, by repeating that I do welcome this chance to be here, because it gives me an opportunity to talk about the reality of Mexico and about some of the things that we're doing on a number of issues. And this is important, I think, for me as an ambassador, as it will be for any other ambassador, because the image of our country, of our countries, is nowadays permeated or is conducted by so many different factors, and it's unfortunately doesn't always reflect the reality of what's going on in our countries. And I think that all of you here in Israel are very much aware of that what is perceived outside of Israel as to what's going on here does not always reflect the truth of what is really happening here. And I think that when people come to Israel, they realize that what they've been hearing in the press and seeing in the news abroad does not coincide with what they see here, and when they speak with people here in Israel. Well, something very similar happens with Mexico today. Unfortunately, I think that for all countries, whenever there's a negative story, that's what really gets out, and that's what really gets promoted. And a lot of the good news and a lot of the good aspects, the positive aspects that are taking place, are not necessarily making it to the news. In this regard, I am sure that all of you have heard quite a lot about recent situations of crime and violence in Mexico. And before I go into that specific topic, I would actually like to tell you about some of the good news that probably you're not hearing about what's going on in Mexico as a context of the situation in my country. The first thing I think you should know is that Mexico, it's a very large country. It's 106 million inhabitants, more or less half women, half men, and about 46% of the population in Mexico is in a productive age. We are a very young population in general. This is a very good thing in terms of the prospects for the economy. At the same time, it's a major challenge, as it will be for any country, to have such a large number of young people who are looking for jobs, who need all sorts of services in terms of housing, education, health, etc. But nevertheless, this is the demographic situation that we have in Mexico. We're the 13th largest economy in the world, and there are some predictions and some studies that have been done recently that are estimating that in the next 30 years we're going to be within the first 5 largest economies in the world. And I want to emphasize this because usually when sometimes we think about Mexico, one thinks about a country that's still a developing country, a poor country, all these prejudices that exist of, the Mexican leaning against a cactus with a sombrero and, with a beer in his hand. And this actually does not quite correspond to the magnitude of the size of the economic importance that the country has and will continue to have in the future. We are, as I said, the 13th largest economy in the world, and in that context we're also the 10th largest exporter of goods in the world. In the context of Latin America, just to put it in that frame of reference, we export more than Argentina and Brazil put together. And I think that's also an important element to have in mind. As you probably know, we are members, or we are part of the tripartite North American Free Trade Agreement, together with Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And this constitutes the largest free trade area in the world. Amongst the three countries, we're about 420 million inhabitants. And the goods and services that are exchanged between the three of us exceeds $1.3 trillion. In terms of population, the European Union is larger, but in terms of what is being traded and the economic size of it, the North American Free Trade Agreement is bigger than that. Mexico, at the same time, and I think this is a very important element, has a network of free trade agreements with 44 countries around the world, including Israel. We have a free trade agreement with Israel. We have a free trade agreement with the European Union, which of course covers all of the countries of the European Union. And this makes us one of the most open economies in the world today. This, of course, is an enormous opportunity, and I think is part of the reason why the economy has grown and is growing the way it has in the recent past. It also, of course, creates a vulnerability, and that's why in the recent past, because of the financial crisis, we were particularly affected by what happened around the world, not just in Mexico. But I think we're in the process of a very strong recovery this year and looking towards the future. And I think that is largely due, again, to the fact that we are broadly linked to many countries around the world. Foreign direct investment in Mexico, which is also a very good indicator of the confidence that others have in the country, it's very important. It's about $21 billion a year, in that range, 40% of which comes from the United States, and about 36% comes from the European Union. And I think this is, again, an important element, because what it means is that the countries and the investors, both companies and the people themselves, the businessmen and businesswomen themselves, trust Mexico enough to continue to invest and to bring their capital into the country. And it's a vote of confidence in terms of what the economic prospects of the country are, but also in terms of its political and social stability. And I think that this is a very important aspect to keep in mind when we think about the images of violence and clashes that are taking place in Mexico in the context of organized crime. Another indicators which I think we should keep in mind to give you an idea of what Mexico is. We're and sometimes when I mention this to people, they're very surprised. We're the 5th largest oil producer in the world. Many times I have been asked, well, what natural resources does Mexico have? Well, we happen to have a lot of oil. We're the 9th largest exporter of oil in the world. You probably don't hear much about it here, because most of it, of course, we're exporting to the US. But there used to be a time when some of Mexican oil was actually being refined here in Xifa up until a few years ago. So this is not, again, is not an element that should be so distant from the reality that we have here in Israel. We are on another series of indicators, the 4th largest country in terms of our biodiversity, which I think is a very important aspect. We're very proud of that in Mexico, and we're doing as much as we can to protect that natural heritage that we have in the country. Mexico is sort of like, I guess that if you will take Israel and extend it all across the Mexican map, you will see many of the different landscapes and climates that you have in a small scale here in Israel. We have in very large scale in Mexico. There's the desert in the north, jungles in the south, tropical weather, snows in some parts of the country, a very, very large coastline in three, the Pacific Ocean, the Caribbean, and the Atlantic. So it's, again, this is something that I think is very important in terms of the richness of the country, but also in terms of its access to different parts of the world. Of course, in terms of the trade aspects of it, our geographical position is a very important one, as we have a reach not only to the north to the United States and Canada, to the south to Central America, but to the European, African, and other markets, to the east, and of course all of Asia in the west. And we're, I think, taking full advantage of this economic, of this geographical situation. In the political aspect, in the recent past, I think the last decade, as some of you may know, Mexico had some dramatic developments. We are consolidating our democratic institutions. In the year 2000, we had elections that for the first time changed the power in the executive to an opposition party after 70 years of rule of a former party that was controlling the country. I think this was a very important development. It was not a one-shot type of situation. It came in as a consequence of other changes that had been taken place in the country in the decade before, and in the decade since. Of course, this has been consolidating in different ways. We have probably one of the most advanced electoral systems in the world, which is a very important element, because one of the problems that we had in Mexico before, and I think many countries have had in the past, is that in order to guarantee and create confidence in democratic processes, you need to have elections that are credible, that are free, fair, transparent, and that people really believe that whoever won the election really won the election. And I think that we have managed to do this. And I know it sounds maybe like, well, so what? But this was a very important thing for us to do in Mexico. We also have a very, and these are important challenges in Mexico, but we have a wide-ranging and sophisticated educational system, as well as provision of health care for all of the population. This is guaranteed by the government. And when you think of a population of 106 million people, this again gives you an idea of the magnitude of the challenge that Mexico has to face, but that nonetheless we're doing our best to tend to that. I think this gives you a context of what the country more or less is, where we are right now. And it gives you the framework to understand what has been happening in the past 4 years, when the present government of Mexico, decided to have a very decisive policy to dismantle the organized crime syndicates that had become very powerful in the country. When I spoke with Professor Megid a few days ago about what this lecture should be called, and there was one idea that this should be, the war on drugs, and I said to him, well, it's really more the fight against organized crime. And I think that this is not just a verbal game that I'm playing with here, but I think it's more descriptive of the important challenge that Mexico is facing right now. That these are very sophisticated organizations, almost like corporate bodies, that are dealing with all aspects of organized criminal activities, which includes, of course, the production, the processing, and the marketing, transport and marketing of the drugs themselves. But it also includes, of course, the money laundering of the financing of the finances that are recovered from this type of activity. It includes the organizational framework that's behind this type of operations that are, very wealthy type of operations, which also include, of course, and this was part of the problem that had to be faced by the Mexican government. These organizations had been trying to permeate into the institutions and the society in Mexico, and had managed in many parts of the country to be very effective in that regard. In other words, they had basically bought up and corrupted the elected authorities in some cities in Mexico. They had through intimidation, but also through corruption, taking control of some of the police elements and the security forces in some areas. In other words, they had really, permeated. They had extended their grips across the board in order to have whole areas where they could freely work in their criminal activities. This is something that that became very difficult and challenging to deal with, and it had to do also with something that happened in Latin America in the past 20 years or so. Mexico used to be, in the years past, basically a transit country for drugs. And why a transit country? Because very little was being produced or being elaborated in Mexico. We were growing some marijuana here and there, but it was not. Mexico was not a central part of this activity. Some of the more lucrative drugs, such as cocaine, heroin, etc., and others, were coming from different parts of the world. And of course, in our region, a lot of it was coming from Colombia, was coming from Bolivia, but there were others that were coming from other areas of the world through Mexico. The problem, of course, being is that we are situated right next to the largest market of drugs, which is the United States. It's sort of like there's to use an element that was once used when the debate of the North American Free Trade Agreement was being discussed in the United States. There is kind of a sucking sound, and it's basically, there's the sucking sound of Americans absorbing and buying up all these drugs that are coming through their borders and distributed and being used by the population in the United States. So this, of course, creates a very difficult situation. And what had happened is that the United States, working together with some other countries such as Colombia and Bolivia and others in Central America, had been effective in blocking some of the access routes to the United States through the sea, through the air, through land, and as it became more and more difficult for the organized cartels in the southern part of the hemisphere and elsewhere around the world to access the United States through different ways, and actually also access Mexico in order to go to the U.S., what happened is that they basically, the whole operations were being transferred to Mexico, so that not only the production was being done in Mexico, but also the whole question of commercialization of the drug market was being done in Mexico. This includes the money laundering, of course, includes the elaboration of the synthetic drugs in illegal laboratories in Mexico, And of course, the whole question of protecting this range of activities in order to make sure that the final product gets to the United States, where it is sold at prices which are a multiple of what they were originally in the original place where they were produced. This, of course, created the problem that we're facing in Mexico right now. In other words, the activities of this cartels became consolidated in Mexico. The whole structure was being done in Mexico. And different cartels grew up, different mafia groups in different parts of the country, competing with each other in many cases for control of the markets and the access and whatnot, with a corrupting influence in many parts, as I was saying, of our society and our institutions, and also. And one aspect that is really very negative and very worrisome, very well armed. And this is something that we have we have talked about a lot with our friends from the United States, because it is very easy to get arms in the United States. As you probably, if you have ever followed these debates in the U.S., they are people who uphold the right of all citizens in the U.S. to have weapons and to acquire these weapons. In Mexico, it's very restrictive, the possibility of buying a gun, let alone a rifle or anything more sophisticated than that. But in the U.S., it's not. You can go to arms fairs in border towns in Texas or in Arizona and whatnot, and you can buy whatever you want. So these people go and buy these weapons, bring them back into Mexico, and of course, these are groups of criminals that are very, very well armed. So well armed that they have actually presented important challenges in the fights that we've had with the Mexican army in dealing with them. So this gives you an idea of the magnitude of the type of weapons that these people are. That these people have. We have tried by many ways to convince the United States to be more restrictive in the possibility of having this easy access to weapons. It's not an easy thing to get them to agree to something like this, but nevertheless, I mean, the conversations continue with the Americans in this regard. The strategy that this government followed, therefore, from the very beginning, was to actually use the Mexican army to fight against these groups and take control of some of the areas where they were, basically acting as if they were the owners of the place. Why use the Mexican army? This was a very controversial decision in Mexico, and some people still question whether this was the wise thing to do or not. But the fact is that in many places the security forces, the police, the local police in many areas, was actually already so corrupted and collaborating with the criminal elements. So we had to use the armed forces, not only the army but also our Navy people that have been heavily involved in dealing with this phenomenon. And I think that the strategy is moving ahead. I think we have managed to weaken some of the structure of these organizations. And to actually get them where it really hurts, which is when getting to the money, to the profits that they're making out of this business. The question, of course, is how do you measure? It's very difficult to measure how far you have advanced when it's basically something that's it's almost reproducing itself. It's like the gremlins. You put water and more grow here. But nonetheless, I think there's some indicators that we're moving in the right direction. In the past 4 years, 125 leaders of these organizations or their lieutenants have been either captured or killed, and over 5,000 of their henchmen have also been either captured or killed directly by the operations of the Mexican government. Those of you that may have followed the news will say that, well, these numbers are conservative numbers because you probably heard figures around the 30,000 people that have died. The truth of the matter is that a lot of these deaths have been actually infighting between the groups themselves, between the criminal organizations themselves, because the moment that we have actually, say, removed or cleared an area of one of the organizations, others have come in to try to take it over, and of course there has been a lot of infighting amongst the different cartels, and fighting within the cartels themselves. As the leaders have been sucked away or have been taken away, there has been, of course, the power struggle as to who is going to be the next capo of these organizations, and of course the number of deaths and the nature of the violence has been very very shocking. And I'm sure you've seen some of the news on many of the things that they have done. When they kill each other, and then they cut the head of the body, and this type of things. Recently, in early September, there was a very or late August, I believe it was, a very ghastly situation where they had actually intercepted a transport of illegal workers coming from Central and South America that were going to the U.S. People that were coming from Ecuador, from Peru, etc., Central America, which were moving to the U.S. to cross the border illegally and work in the U.S. But that's, I mean, it is, you might say, well, this will be an illegal work, but I mean, these people are really going there because they want to work, because they want to have a better life, because they want to send money back to their families. Well, the thing is that they were intercepted by one of the cartels, and they were told that that they wanted them to cooperate to bring some drugs into the U.S. with them, use them as what we called mules, and they refused, and all of them were killed. There were like almost 80 people that died, and in the most ghastly and horrible way. All this innocent men, mostly men, that were killed by these people. And of course, when you see those types of scenes, when you hear this type of crimes, it's very shocking, and it really makes society very vulnerable to this type of things. But again, let me emphasize that what is happening right now, and this is what we're estimating is going on right now, is that because of the weakening that we have managed to do to some of the structures and the leadership of these cartels, and the fighting that is going on within them, that a lot of this manifestation of violence has to do precisely because of that. And there's a lot of disarray amongst these groups, and therefore there's a lot of this criminal activity, which of course carries with it a cost in human lives of innocent victims. I'm not saying that this is not happening. Of course it is happening. But nonetheless, we should not lose the focus that most of the people that have died in this fight have been the criminals themselves. Now, when is this going to finish, or how is this going to finish, is anybody's guess right now. It's I think what is important from the point of view of the Mexican government is that we are able to move to restore the rule of law where it had been lost, or the control of the government where these organized groups had managed to take control of municipalities or the police, the local police of certain areas, etc. So in that regard, we're talking about making advances that will eventually, hopefully, bring us closer to putting this problem behind us. Of course, as long as there is such an attractive market for the drugs, it's going to be very difficult to put an end to this type of criminal activity. Let me just give you an indication. In the past, since this administration in Mexico came to power, $10 billion worth of drugs have been confiscated. And this is what has been confiscated. This is not an estimate of how much the drugs is that have gone to the market. This includes 34,000 automobiles that belong to the criminals, 500 airplanes, 365 boats, and 85,000 weapons. 85,000 weapons. Again, we're talking about numbers that are really very challenging for anybody. So this is, as I said, this is what we have been doing. This is the challenge that we're still facing. This is what the sort of like a description of the situation where we are right now. I'll be very happy to discuss this in more detail later on, but this is more or less, where we are right now. I think that as a final thing that I want to say about this is that the present government of President Cedillo, I think, feels pretty confident that we are pursuing the right strategy, that we're moving in the right direction, which is not to say that the challenge or the problem is behind us, but that this is the proper strategy to pursue in this regard. Some people have said to the president, well, you should not have done this, or it was very risky to put the army involved in this and whatnot. And the president has responded, well, if anybody has a better strategy, let me know what it is. And I don't think anybody at this point has come up with a better strategy of how to deal with a problem of this magnitude, unless you really use the full force of the state behind you. And as I said, even though we have used the full force of our armed forces, nevertheless, it has not been an easy battle. And I think that all of you that have served in the armed forces here in Israel are aware of this type of challenges and the kind of things that are involved in when an army gets involved in this type of things. Let me conclude my talk by mentioning some of the context of Latin America in which Mexico, all of this situation in Mexico is taking place. I think that even though we're a very diverse continent, in a lot of the countries, we have many things that identify us, but also many things that makes us different. There are some similarities that I want to highlight. I think in the past 2 decades or so, the turn to democracy in Latin America has been one of the most important developments, political developments in the world, especially when you look back in history from where we came to where we are right now. This has been a very positive turn. And as you are all aware, I'm sure this is not anything that's guaranteed. It's still fragile democracies in many cases, and in some others, it is not a risk-free situation. We're also engaged, all of us, in one way or another, in fighting crime and insecurity in our countries. In some cases, like Mexico, are the ones that I already mentioned, But in other cases, you have regular crime of different types. You probably saw some of the news of what was going on in the favelas in Brazil just a week ago, I think it was. So this is, all of us in different ways face this type of challenges. The challenge to consolidate the rule of law and to guarantee peace and security for all of the citizens of our respective countries. I think all of us are also trying to improve our economic situation. By and large, I think, with the notable exceptions, of course, we're all pursuing a liberal model of development, pursuing a free, open economies, which is something very different to the Latin America of 30, 40 years ago, where all of these were taboos, to deal with. This has changed dramatically in Latin America, I say, with a few exceptions that we all know what they are. And the other thing the final comment that I want to make is that you do find a continent, the Latin American continent, that is a growing political and economic force in international affairs. And I think that this is something that is increasingly important for many countries, other countries from other parts of the world, including Israel, as we move on towards the future and try to forge closer ties between countries of Latin America and countries in different parts of the world.